Hello, I am going to be speaking on the political polarization or the crisis of political polarization in the church. Political polarization has been increasing, it's been incredibly prevalent as of late in the world around us, whether it's on any topic from climate change, abortion, sexuality, those things that we've talked about in my classmates, their lectures and their papers are on those ideas. Mine is kind of this idea that this political divide has made its way into the church. I want to look into the backgrounds of where these differences stem from. I want to look into what's perpetuating them, what we can do to avoid them, and some biblical or some quotes from the Bible that kind of frown upon or in some cases heavily urge against division in the church. I don't have slides up because one, everything has been a little bit insane with overloads, honors projects, and family things that I don't need to necessarily get into. I apologize for the mess behind me. Moving and all the stuff has been insane, but I wanted to devote my attention to discussing these issues. Political polarization has, as I said, been increasingly prevalent in the world around us. It has found its way eternally to leak into the church. There's always been issues on whether we as Adventists should speak up on injustices and public political issues, or what we should become or be nonpartisan in. We've talked a lot about, I believe even on our field trip we discussed that it was consistently a thing where the women wouldn't get the credit the men would, and where do we stand in things of that nature. And I believe ultimately a lot of it's that we can have differing views. Where the problem comes in is when we allow those views to divide us and break us apart as a church and become a hostile environment where we're completely losing focus of our what makes us different as Christians, as followers of God, pushing for this message of spreading the love of God, spreading the message of God, and then as Adventists on spreading what makes us a little bit distinct from the world, like Sabbath rest and our health message. All those things, all the stressors of life often compile in a way that we aren't able to commit our full heart and attention and soul and everything to anything. We are spread in a billion different ways. Social media and the way that things have been perpetuated in the news in such an aggressive way makes everything seem like a us versus them battle, where it cuts out the humanity of it, where if we admit things like our bias and where we're coming from, and we go to others with our love for them first. I believe in here I wrote a note that said above wow, warning against judging others, and then further on, and that's the idea of judging others and being blind to our own faults in Matthew 7:3-5, and then also saying where Paul is instructing us to value others above ourselves in Philippians 2:3-4. This idea that we need to approach conversations and topics and dialogue as opposed to argue and to push to be right. I believe that those ideas that stem from this idea that everyone needs to be right, everyone has moral high ground, and they ignore their own fault, their own bias, and the whole idea of what we're supposed to be working towards. And I believe we're supposed to work towards unity. We're supposed to work towards creating a better understanding of God's love, and we can't do that if we're falling into these divisive almost traps. And it's not saying anyone in the church is being intentional and evil and dividing us, but we sometimes can fall into these patterns that we see all around us in our day-to-day. We're not able to separate that when we go to church and when we act with others, because who we are is our biases, it's our beliefs, it's our values, and it's how we treat people. So if we start in our beliefs and in our church with having a care, a support, and a compassion towards others, and a willingness to sit back and be slow to speak and quick to listen, to be open and empathetic, as opposed to getting in the pulpit and trying to make a political statement, intentionally dividing. I have seen many sermons that have struck a chord and sometimes caused me to be reactive and leave, or me to be upset and miss messages. And I think that at its heart, I find places where I want to check myself in that, and I go, okay, was I reacting, or was something also, and it both can be true, something could have been said to be political, something could have been said to be divisive. I've heard people say, this is a us versus you, it's a this group versus this group, and I believe that is a dangerous thought to bring into a church, because yes, we need to call out bad behavior and bad treatment of people, but to perpetuate this idea that it's a huge thing and that there's no middle ground, that to believe and support more conservative ideas means that you hate those on the progressive side, and vice versa, is a slope that creates bigger feelings and bigger reactions and bigger rifts between groups than there actually is. I believe that with the loudness of things like that, with the way that people have divided, I think at our hearts, especially within the church, especially as followers of God, I think that we have a lot more in common than we admit. And I think that to lean into that and to look at verses like this where they're saying death and life are in the power of the tongue in Ephesians 4:29, the words that we say have weight. To divide, to purely divide, and to make a cool statement that makes us stand out, we need to ensure that what we're saying is supporting unity and growth and the mission, not just supporting change or anything just for the sake of change. And we also don't need to have the same sermons condemning certain groups of people over and over again, because that's divisive as well. I think personally I liked to highlight my bias is I really put my source of truth heavily is the Bible. I think I spent the majority of my paper with verses acknowledging that is a limited scope. That is, this verse here supports my idea, this verse here supports my idea. And there can be political arguments made. Maybe mine are leaning very heavily towards taking a moment and not judging others, taking a moment and not being divisive, and to not sow discord among brothers, and to all of these things where we need to focus on not judging and not being harsh with each other. But then there's others that say that not opposing things, but politically, if people were to take a party-to-party stance on it, they could say, well, if you're supporting this idea, then in the Bible it also says this other thing, like to do no harm, and that God hates when the innocent are preyed upon, things like that. And that's a really rough paraphrase. I do not remember the exact verse. In my opinion, all of those things can coexist, not hurting others, but the idea that we can be attempting to be less judgmental and know that we have this foundation of loving God and loving others. And because of that, we need to support ideas and values that support others around us. When we see things that we're convicted by, we should say something, but we also need to remember all that is implied with it. It isn't, we can't just make bold statements and assume that the other people are evil or wrong. We need to come and approach them with a softer and a more understanding want and desire to understand where they're coming from, because often we are a lot less divided than we seem. Often at the end of the day, we take the humanity out of it when we try and put each other in boxes, and we have knee-jerk reactions to things that we think diametrically oppose our beliefs. And at the end of the day, we are people. We love the people around us. We love where we came from. sometimes we love the change that we've found. Sometimes we grew up in a home and we live in a completely different way now. All of those things affect where we're coming from. And admitting that everyone has those stories and everyone has this want to do better and support others, ideally. Not everyone, there's good and there's bad people, but even to define that, even to say you're good and you're bad, perpetuates this idea that there is a need for division, there's a need for boxes of you believe this, so you're here, and I believe this, so I'm here. And in a church, that will create such rifts that make it so people feel pushed out. And people will leave God, people will leave the church, people will leave families. In my experience, I had, at the time, in-laws who assumed things about my family's beliefs and mine, and they blamed me for their son's change and adaptation and his beliefs that they had almost pushed upon him, whereas mine I'd kind of fought to and grappled with to understand, because I was hearing his side, I was hearing my side, I was hearing my schoolmates' sides, and I am not perfect, and I do have biases, as I've said a billion times, but I've been hurt a lot by political rifts within the family, and they've been used in a religious way, and they've been, well, God would never, and when we start putting those boxes and those labels of saying God would never do this, we just need to make sure it's rooted in my opinion, sources of truth like the Bible, because that is our example of his love and his opinion and his words to us through others. So at the end of the day, I believe political polarization, to lean into it and to fall kind of victim to this idea that it's us versus them, whether it's in the church or us as a church versus those not, is harmful to everyone around us, and it defeats the entire purpose of bringing people in and bringing people to God. And at the end of the day, we're all human, we're all doing our best, and to not look at these filters that we learned about throughout this school year, we are doing a disservice to our understanding and our willingness to interact with others. Ultimately, I know that was a big ramble. I'm very fascinated by this topic, and I'd be more than happy to have many, many more conversations. If anyone has any questions, I have a tendency to ramble, so I'm trying to keep it concise. I have my paper attached, and I have a bunch of Bible verses in there, and I'd be thrilled to hear any that are either opposing or additional or maybe more context. I tried to read the chapters and areas that I was referencing, but everything is a little bit rushed and everything's a little bit chaotic over here. But at the end of the day, I believe this class pushed me to understand why I believe what I believe, adopt other viewpoints or understandings of viewpoints, and to keep pushing to do better and be there for others and understand the history of why Adventists are different and what that means for us. And that it doesn't mean that we're better, it just means that we have this different approach to life. And to me, it is incredibly beneficial, the rest that we have. And I think that falling into the stress of the world and this idea of us versus them, and everything is a triggering topic, I think that we bog down our mental health. I believe we bog down our ability to rest and put the phone away and put these differences aside, and we lose friends and families. We miss the message, we miss the love. And I think to continue on to do better and support this dialogue that we've had in this class, that I've had in the recent year or two with family and friends, I think that we have to start with individual conversations and an individual evaluation of where we need to grow and what we can do to be better. Thank you for listening. I hope you all, or you, have a lovely day. Thank you again for your patience. It has meant the world, and I can't believe this is kind of my last college assignment and presentation, so thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to end it before I get all teary.